Hello everyone, welcome back to this mini episode edition of the Female Genius podcast. Guys, I'm filming this, okay? Usually mini episodes, I just record it, upload it straight to Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but I kind of thought, wow, like some people don't have either of those and they're missing out on the joy and the quality that is the mini episodes, okay? I think the mini episodes are a lot more fun, they're a lot more random, and they're a lot less edited because the whole point is that I just don't have enough time in my life to do a full episode every single week. So a mini episode is like a supplement. It's a little dash, it's a little flavor of the Female Genius podcast. But I feel like a lot of the times we dig deep, we find out more things, we learn more things. And today I kind of want to talk about loneliness. Oh, by the way, I haven't introduced myself. Somebody was like, you never introduce yourself in these podcasts. Some people are listening and they don't even know my name. Hi everyone, my name is Jesi and I am the host of the Female Genius podcast. Welcome back, geniuses, because today we are going to be talking about loneliness.
Female Genius.
Loneliness is something I've spoken about before. In fact, I think the loneliness paradox, or my exploration, quote unquote, of loneliness was the very first mini footnotes episode that I had ever done on the podcast. And I wanted to touch on this topic again because, number one, it's been a frequent conversation with me and a lot of my friends. It's been something that I feel like I've been struggling with on and off. Well, particularly it was on from October last year to maybe around December time. I just felt absolutely lonely. I mean, the loneliness epidemic, but it's something that has been frequently talked about because of the dangers and the effects that it has on your health. And essentially this whole idea of loneliness is very pervasive and is at the forefront of my mind and could potentially be at the forefront of yours. I listened back to the loneliness paradox episode and I didn't think there isn't things to gain from it. I just feel like I didn't approach the topic with enough nuance. I feel like I was just spewing, you need to get a hobby. You need to find your third space. And I think there is value in seeing that. But I want this episode to be spoken to directly for people who do feel lonely and to try and fundamentally understand what loneliness is, where it comes from. I'm going to speak a little bit about my experience, my perception, and hopefully provide some tips, but towards the end of how to help it. But again, I want to show how nuanced and complicated and how layered this situation is. First of all, I kind of want to define loneliness. And I got this from a YouTube video, to be honest, and that YouTube video got it from a paper. And as always, I link everything that I use to kind of come to conclusion of all of my thoughts. But the definition of loneliness is a subjective internal state. It's the distressing experience that results from perceived isolation or an unmet need between an individual's preferred and actual experience. Now, this definition, I think, is what encouraged and prompted this episode to talk about it with a bit more nuance, because not to go all English literature analysis on you, but it's number one is about perceived isolation. So there's not a set definition of what loneliness is. I think also is a very important point to touch upon now before we get into it. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Solitude is the intentional carving out of a space to spend with yourself, which I think is very important, and it's an important component to having good mental health and of ultimately having fruitful and fulfilling, life and thoughts and experiences, and a lot of them. Whereas loneliness is very different. Loneliness is a sense or a feeling of social isolation. This idea that you feel like either nobody understands you, nobody gets you, you don't get along, unmet needs, you don't feel loved, you don't feel emotionally seen, or you just don't have anybody to talk to about specific things. Like, there are loads of layers to this, and it's all subjective depending on the individual. And ultimately, one guy who's playing Roblox every single day and is talking to his friends on Roblox and has no friends in real life might not ever feel lonely because he's quote unquote needs are being met, and he does not perceive himself as being isolated from society. He perceives himself as finding connection with people online, whereas somebody who's in the exact same situation might also then feel like, oh my god, I am so alone, I don't have anybody in real life to talk to, I don't have anybody to touch, to feel, to love, anything, and I just feel so alone. Again, it's a perceived internal perceptual state. We all have perceptions of what a friendship should look like, or what a romantic relationship should look like, or a familial relationship should look like. We all have perceptions or a preferred idea of what a community that surrounds us and that we would feel fulfilled by looks like. And loneliness often comes from the fact that we look around us and it's not living up to our expectations. There is a dissonance between our dream and our current reality. And that's not necessarily to say that it's the fault of yourself, because ultimately sometimes you can be in an environment where you are not being met at your needs and the people around you aren't being that good or aren't seeing you the way you deserve to be seen. But it also doesn't mean that it's completely on the community that you are in and the people that you surround yourself by or have been surrounded by as well. It's one of those things where it's very complex and it's an intermix of the two. And I do think it requires some reflection and some, solitude. So I kind of want to then look into what is the neuropsychology behind loneliness? Like, how do you fall into this like perpetual state of, oh my God, I feel so alone, and then all of this stuff. And so from what I found, and it's written by a paper that I'll link below, is the most established theoretical explanation for loneliness is one done by this guy called John Cacioppo. Guys, I'm so bad with surnames, right? And he proposes this almost cycle or this vicious cycle of how loneliness is perpetuated. So number one, you recognize that you are lonely. And this could be a one-off experience. Maybe you've gone from being at a party and then you come home and you wish you had somebody to speak to, but there's nobody there. Or maybe you're going through a hard time and you're crying and then you call a bunch of people and nobody answers the phone and you feel alone, right? That could be a one-off experience. And this causes a biological response that is kind of similar to other chronic stresses in life. So maybe it's like, health problems or like financial stress, like your body physically feels that feeling of, oh my God, I am alone. So typically this biological response is something that is highly contained, and it's not perpetuated into other phases of life. So for example, even if you feel lonely coming out from that party and you come home by yourself, the next day you'll go to work and that feeling of loneliness doesn't follow you per se. You still feel accepted within your community, you still feel seen, you still feel heard, you still feel all of these things. It was just that one isolated moment with that one biological response. And so initially, again, it's highly contained. But over time, if you then ultimately always have this experience or this feeling of being alone, right? If you lack things like social contact physically or psychologically, you get to continuously trigger this biological response. And this has a psychological dysregulation or knock-on effect into different areas of how your brain operates in life. For example, right, you tend to have an enhanced sensitivity for social preservation. You care a lot more about how society perceives you. You are more aware of social threats. You're more on edge. And you have more motive to attempt and try to restore social connection. So you're more trigger happy to speak to somebody and you begin to be more like, oh my God, yes, I'll go out with you. Yes, I'll go rock climbing with you. Yes, I'll jump off a bridge with you. Initially, it starts like that, which I think it kind of makes sense because your brain is always there to protect you, okay? Your brain is complicated and is nuanced and is there to keep you safe and comfortable. So I do think if you are continuously feeling or experiencing the biological response of loneliness, then it makes sense why your brain is going to be more on edge to see social threats because number one, it perceives you lacking social community. Humans are social creatures, and so we are designed to kind of look after each other's backs. And if you feel like there's nobody checking your back, you're going to be more vigilant about what's going on around you, and you're going to have a drive to seek to find somebody to help you watch your back. However, again, if this happens over time, it could potentially lead to a vicious cycle where the way you respond to social cues and information is dysregulated, in the sense that you could potentially start to read into things. Like, if somebody says hi, you could be like, oh my God, but they didn't say hi the way they usually say hi. They must hate me. They must hate me too. Or you text your friend and your friend doesn't immediately respond, oh my God, they don't love me. They don't appreciate me. They don't want me, blah, 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 blah. And then over time, you tend to perceive a lot more social information as overtly negative, and behaviors and thoughts then begin to undermine positive social relationships. And that increases the feelings of loneliness, and that cycle perpetuates itself. You begin to self-isolate because, again, you feel like everybody is being overtly negative to you. You read behaviors as wrong. You then begin to self-isolate and you feel lonelier and lonelier. And that has loads of different effects. I mean, loneliness is a lot more dangerous, I think, than people perceive because we only see it as, oh, you're just not talking to people. But loneliness has a knock-on effect on a lot of different parts of your body. I mean, number one, people who experience extended periods of loneliness have higher rates of cardiovascular diseases, things like dementia. They tend to have faster cognitive decline over their years. They have higher levels of depression, anxiety, and negative self-perception. Needless to say, being alone or being lonely specifically for an extended period of time is damaging to health, and we should treat it like something that is dangerous, like smoking cigarettes or anything of those sort. Talking a little bit about my experience of loneliness, I feel like I kind of other myself in a sense that, not that I don't feel like I'm not like other girls, but I do have this perpetual feeling of state that I don't think people fully, completely understand me. I kind of call this a little bit gifted kid syndrome. And if you understand this perspective, and again, I don't want it to come across like I'm bragging about anything, but when I was in school or during my time at school, I was always known as the smart kid, the kid that worked really hard, the kid that was super studious, the kid that was, reading books all the time and, always thinking about things or suggesting things. And when I was like in year 8 and year 9, so like 12, 13, 14, the friendship group I had at the time didn't necessarily reflect my interests. And I would feel a lot of time when I would bring things up, I'd be like, oh my God, I read this really cool thing, or I read this really, really cool fantasy book. I would get like looked down upon. I remember there was one time where maybe this was really nerdy, I don't know. I was with 3 of the girls in this massive friendship group, and I was basically talking about, oh my God, I'm reading this really amazing fantasy book, and I really ship the main 2 characters, and blah, 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 blah. And like one of the girls looked up and down at me, and she's like, you're so wet. You're such a nerd. Like, ugh. And it made me feel, I went home and cried, and it made me feel like, oh, am I just not normal? Is it the things that bring me so much joy and I love doing just really weird? And I think having that kind of experience, that happened again and again and again, where people would feel confused or, there would feel like a sense of dissonance between the things I was interested in and the things I liked, between how I looked or how they felt like I should be, particularly I think as a result of my race. And so I would feel othered and I would feel like, okay, nobody really understands me and I don't really get along with anybody. I can kind of attribute it to, if you've ever watched The Simpsons, Lisa Simpson experiences this a lot, where like she doesn't fit in or she doesn't, feel connected to the other girls in her class because of her interests or because of her highly academic pursuits or because she likes to play saxophone. And she often feels very isolated within her community and within her family because she feels like I'm the only person who likes what I like and my needs aren't being met. Like nobody truly really understands what I'm going through. And so I would feel like I would other myself. And I feel like recently, in this current phase of life I'm in, it really feels like I'm the only one in this phase. A lot of my friends either have jobs or, they're in uni still. And I was like the only one not in uni, like that I was particularly close to. A lot of my friends are in romantic relationships. I was the only one not in uni, not in a romantic relationship, not with a full-time job. I'm not particularly close with my family. And so I just felt like, number one, they couldn't relate to what I was going through, point number one. And number two, I just didn't have anybody to rely on, to lean on. And that kind of gave me a perceptual feeling of loneliness. I would feel bad for texting my friends during the day because I was like, I don't have anything to do, but they might have something to do. Am I bothering them? And they would reply and I would read into their message, be like, you know what, I'm just like not gonna message anyone. And it led to a point where for like a good 3 or 4 weeks, I just wouldn't reply to anyone because it would literally give me anxiety and panic attacks. And it wasn't that I didn't want to not feel alone. I really, really, really wanted to feel connected to somebody. And I think that's the really annoying thing about loneliness, is that it's not that you don't want to be with anybody, and it's not that you don't want to be seen by people. It's just this feeling that anybody can't see you, like it feels physically impossible. And it's really sad. And, this whole gifted kid, like loneliness syndrome, or this feeling of not feeling in the same phase of life. And as we get older and as, we go through life and we become young adults and all of these things, I think this is something we're going to experience more and more, because there's going to be a phase where we're not in like year 7, year 8, year 9, like we're not going through the school phases anymore. Like somebody's going to have a job, somebody's not going to have a job, somebody's going to be married, somebody's not going to be married, somebody's going to have 3 kids, somebody's not going to have any kids, somebody's going to have a lot of money and some people aren't not going to have a lot of money. And we're coming to this phase of life where we diversify through life experience and interest, and things become more and more complicated. And I feel like that's when people begin to feel more and more alone. All of that being said, I would just say that, number one, because loneliness is such an individual experience as given by the definitions, and because loneliness is a very, very, very vicious cycle, as explained when I was talking about, John Carpaccio's theory of how loneliness is pervasive, it becomes very hard when you're in it, and it becomes very hard to pull yourself out. A lot of the time in friendships, in social community, when you have unmet needs, it's because they don't know that there are needs to be met. Like he was like, I didn't know you were feeling this bad about this many things, right? And I didn't know you were perceiving my answers as this way. You never said anything. In the same sense of, I didn't know that you didn't feel like you could talk to me because of the way I respond or things like that. And then you start to begin to realize that everybody is kind of wrapped up in their own little world, and everybody's struggling with their own things, and everybody tries to meet. Everybody always starts with, how would I feel, or how would I want to feel? And then until you go and then express to them, like, actually, this isn't what's working for me, or this is what I truly think, and this is what I truly feel, your needs will never be met if they're in your head. I always tell my friends, like, an invisible boundary is not a boundary. So that's one perspective in terms of unmet need. But then again, perceived isolation is, again, perception. And so I would say there are different things. And again, like I said, the solutions are often individual. One thing I would say is hobbies really helped me. Having hobbies and really doing something outside of my brain, like making music, or I would go to the cinema by myself so much. And eventually somebody was like, that's so lonely and sad. But once the movie's on, like, the world disappears, you know? A good movie, the world disappears. I don't really care who's next to me, and I'm just fully focused on that movie. And I used to really find myself get lost in it. I read loads of books. I journal. Like, I would just go to coffee shops sometimes and sit and read a book. And oftentimes when I would go to coffee shops, I'd sit next to somebody who was also there by themselves and have a lovely, brilliant conversation. Or I'd go to Waterstones and have a conversation with a bookseller and really fulfill that need for human social connection. It really does help bring you out of the cycle and that vicious cycle of, oh my God, I am so alone. I don't have anybody to, contact with, or I just spend so much time alone in my thoughts. Let's get you outside of your thoughts. I also have this belief that if you do not know where to place yourself in life, if you're confused, if you're lost, if you're lonely, put yourself in a position of service. And I say this now because, again, perceived isolation, or this internal state of I am so alone, is your brain, right? Your brain is perceiving life this way. And I'm not saying it's inherently wrong, but I'm not saying it's inherently right either. And what I'm trying to say is that if you allow yourself to be of service to someone, if you allow yourself to think a little bit outside of yourself and think about how can I use my talents, my gifts, my time to help somebody who's going through a hard time, or could use my time and my help and value it. And that could be the thing that gets you out of your cycle. And you never know who you meet, and you never know who you can interact with, and you never know what life-changing conversation you might have that could really shift you out of your perspective. But what I think is really important when tackling loneliness in any perspective, in any circumstance, is to really break out of this cycle of picking out negative social cues and further self-isolating. You need to find things that get you outside and out into a community. Going to volunteer at an old people's home. I mean, a lot of dementia homes, a lot of old people's homes, they fully appreciate volunteers. They fully appreciate people coming in and interacting and talking with the old people. Whether it's you're going to go volunteer at old people's kitchen, whatever it is, reading at your local library, put yourself in a position of service to somebody else in your community, and you will begin to feel like the magic of human beings. And, even though we live in a crazy... I need to keep this podcast apolitical, but oh my God, I hate Trump so much. But yeah, I feel like if you are unsure of where to place yourself in life and your communities and your friendship groups or anything, maybe place yourself in a position of service. I would always find, even within my own friendship group, sometimes when I would feel like, oh my God, I'm so alone, nobody understands me, nobody's doing anything, I haven't seen anybody, I'm like, you know what? Let me put on a movie night. Let me invite my friends, and maybe that will make me feel less lonely. Maybe we could have a very vulnerable conversation about how I feel. But ultimately, I'm using my house and buying food and buying snacks and like putting myself in a position of service to my friendship group, being like, okay, you guys can come here. If you're in a position where you have a very shitty friendship group or you don't have any friends, that's a more difficult situation. And I think that's when the loneliness paradox in the last footnotes episode I did on this topic, I'll link it down below, will probably be more of service to you to help you find friends that are better suited for you. But this is more for people that feel lonely, even though they're surrounded by community. And my message to all of the lonely people is your light deserves to be seen in this world. You have something to bring of value to a community around you. And there are people in this life that will love you, right? And are looking to love you. And no, it may not feel that way. I mean, I know it may feel more comfortable, it might feel more easier, even though it's eating you alive to be by yourself because you feel like nobody understands you. Give other people the opportunity to understand you. Give other people the opportunity to understand your internal dialogue, whether good or bad. And, give yourself the opportunity to, find joy in your solitude, turn your loneliness into solitude, find joy in hobbies that you may have never found before. And then also to find love within the people who truly do love you. Because what I found and what I've learned through my experience is that I don't lack love. The love is there. I just need to kind of reach out and grab it. And I really hope that you take this on board. And I really hope, again, as a society, as a collective, we start to take loneliness really seriously. We start to take self-isolation, particularly aside from solitude, very, very seriously, because as I mentioned, as I have this long list here, this is something very dangerous and pervasive and could affect somebody's life and, you know, their psychological state and even their physical health. So, hey, if you haven't heard from a friend in a minute, if you haven't, they haven't, even if they've posted on social media is a fucking lie. If you haven't heard from them in a minute, if they've been posting cryptic stuff on their stories, if you've noticed that all of the Spotify playlists they've made have specific, very depressing artists on them, reach out, send them a text message. If you know your friend is going through something, send them a, hey, like, I'm just here to check up on you. How have you been? Do you want to go get coffee? Do you want to come round? Dinner's on me. Be that person. Reach out to all of the people who don't feel alone. And I hope you guys enjoyed this mini episode. Okay, I like this mini episode. It's really long. It's actually probably the full length of a full episode. See? Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this full episode. I will see you guys next week for the next episode of Female Genius. And guys, I'm very excited for this next episode of Female Genius because we're talking about something that I love so much. We're talking about animation and anime, and we're talking about all of the lessons I have garnered through my many, 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 many years of watching and checking out anime. So make sure you stay tuned, and I will see you guys next week, Friday, the next episode of Female Genius. Bye, guys. Where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere alone in the bitterness, and I would have stayed up with you all night if I know how to save a life. Should I make a playlist to all the lonely people? My playlist skills are top tier. This is a YouTube only end credits scene, so if you're watching on YouTube you don't get to see this part. But where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere alone in the... That one. There's another one that's kind of what's it called? There's another one by The Frame that's like really popular. But there's one, what's it called? I'd give up forever to touch you, and I say that you know that it's true. There's another one by The Fray that's like similar vibes. With I'll look after you. When did that song come out? Am I old? I have a friend called Josh, and we like similar taste in music, that kind of like indie guitar-y rocky vibe. I have a playlist for him that I made 2005. Okay, I had a playlist for him that I made. I love making my friends playlists, honestly, because I'm thinking about them and I listen to a lot of songs and I think about them. But this is Josh's playlist. Oh my god, he hasn't saved it. Maybe he doesn't love me, but there's a lot of good songs on this playlist. I should have added The Fray. Anyway, bye guys.